Hi everyone, my name's Jo. I'm going to show you today how to make a basic sponge recipe. This method is, I believe, from the Women's Institute, although I'm happy to be corrected if I'm wrong. What you'll need is free range eggs, salted butter, caster sugar, self-rising flour, 1 teaspoon of flavouring and 1 teaspoon of milk. Now for the flavouring I use salted caramel here, but you can use whatever you have available to you, it doesn't matter. Now some hardware for you. You're going to need a set of weighing scales, a mixing bowl, a wooden spoon, so I use the silicone spatula as you'll see, an electric mixer. You can use a hand whisk, I don't recommend it for this method. You'll also need a muffin tin and some muffin cases. Now before you start, you need to line the muffin tin with said paper cases. If you don't have a muffin tin, however, you can make the sponge cake in a cake tin or a casserole dish. You just need to make sure that you grease and line the dish first. I would also recommend preheating your oven at this stage to 180 degrees Celsius. If you do have a fan oven, reduce that a little to 160, 170 fan. It really does depend on your oven though. Now you'll notice there are no weights in this recipe. Now this is because the weight of the ingredients comes from the eggs themselves. So your first step, as you can see here, is to weigh the eggs in their shells and take note of the weight that's displayed on the scale. And this will be the base for your other ingredients. So once you have the base weight, you need to measure out the same weight of the butter, sugar and the flour. So in this example, my eggs weighed 197 grams. So I've also weighed out 197 grams of room temperature salted butter, caster sugar and self-rising flour. Other keen bakers among you might be able to see that my butter is a little bit too cold here. It is important that you do have room temperature butter, and ideally you want it to be slightly softer than what was shown here. However, at this point it was quite late at night, so I decided to press on. Don't do as I do in this instance. Make sure your butter is the right temperature before starting, as this will affect the outcome of your cake. Now, if you wanted proof that it was late at this point, and Butterfingers did actually drop the beater, so had to do a bit of additional washing up before recommencing. Now your next task here is to actually separate the sugar into halves. So put half in with your butter mixture and put half in a spotlessly clean mixing bowl. I cannot emphasize that enough. Now we're going to beat together the half of the sugar and the butter and the chosen flavouring until that mixture is well combined and really fluffy. So if you're not using a flavouring that discolours the mixture like mine does here, your butter will actually look paler than when you started, and that's completely normal. Now, for reasons unknown to anyone other than my husband, he decided to focus on our Hungarian figurine here. So meet Kalroy, the Hungarian figurine. It looks a little bit like Charlie Chaplin. Also, a tip to note here that using salted butter does mean that you do not have to add salt to your recipe. However, if you have a preference to control the salt in your recipe, then by all means please use unsalted butter in your recipe and just add your salt to your liking as an additional ingredient. Now set your butter mixture aside and make sure that your beaters at this point are spotlessly clean. You'll see here that we are going to separate our egg whites from the yolk. The easy way to do this is actually with your hands, as you can see here. It's a little bit messy, but it certainly gets the job done, and provided you are very gentle, you needn't worry about the egg yolk separating or splitting at all. So pop the egg yolks into your butter mixture and pop the egg whites into the clean mixing bowl that we put the other half of the sugar in earlier. Now this is where your electric mixer will come into its own. It is October now. You can do this with a hand whisk. You might be done before Christmas, but using a cheap electric mixer means you will be done anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes. What you want to do here is to beat together the rest of the sugar with the egg whites until you can form soft peaks that stand on their own, and the mixture will remain in the bowl when it's turned upside down. So the air that is now incorporated into this mixture will aid your cakes in rising and retaining a lighter sponge texture. Now we're going to take our butter mixture and mix in the egg yolks. If your mixture does look like it is about to curdle, then feel free to add in a few tablespoons of flour at this point, and this will stop the curdling from happening. Now you can use a more traditional all-in-one or combination inverted method to mix your ingredients together, and that will save you from beating your egg whites like this, but it will also result in a denser sponge which is best served hot and covered in custard. Now we're also going to add in some of the egg white mixture here and the rest of the flour and beat this together. Doing this will help loosen the mixture so that you can gently fold in the rest of the egg whites. This is going to retain the air that you've just worked so hard to whip into the egg whites and keep your sponge light. Now, for those of you that don't know how to fold in your mix to incorporate the ingredients, what you need to do is to just gently scrape around the outside of the bowl and then cut into the mixture of the mix. Keep doing this over and over again until you can see that everything is only just combined and not streaky. It is possible to over combine your mix, and again that's going to result in a dense sponge, which we don't want here. Now, following on from incorporating the flour into the butter mixture, you'll also need to incorporate the rest of your egg whites. Do this again by gently folding it together until there are no longer any streaks in the mixture. Now, it's at this point you will need to add your milk. So if your mixture looks okay, you can skip this step. I always add it regardless because for me it's something that my mother and my grandmother used to do. It's hard to describe, but your sponge will have a feel to it as to how dense it is. Now, different flours do absorb ingredients differently, so you may not need to add milk at all, you may need to add a little bit more. I generally tend to find that you can't go far wrong if you stick to a teaspoon of milk. So we are nearly done, and as you can see we have started dividing the mixture into the muffin cases. Now the tip here is to not overfill your cases. I have purposely overfilled them a little bit for reasons which will become clear when I show you how I decorate these. But generally you want them just peeking over the top once they are fully baked. It's not a problem if these are overfilled, it means more cake per person for one, but you can also just slice the top off before you ice it if you find that they do peak a little bit too high once you take them out of the oven. Now, as an optional extra, if you do have access to some gel colourants, and I do recommend gel or powder colourants for this, you can actually colour your sponge. So you can see I left half of my sponge here as the normal sort of cake colour. I felt like having a little bit of fun, so I did start to swirl in some of my gel colourants to create a marbled effect. Now, serendipitously, for it is the season of fat cats after all, here is the section of the tutorial where my cat demands my attention and I get to challenge Hazel and Ange for the title of Chief Cat Lady by asking him to perform for your pleasure. Yes, he does tricks on demand for treats, which is season appropriate, so I have included it here for you.
Sorry, landscape, sorry.
Come, good boy, sit, sit. Hey, come, Vicky, come, sit. Good boy, Paul. You know, kiss. So back to the cakes. So after washing my hands, as you can see, I continued swirling in a few different gel colours just to create that marbled effect. Now, if you do want a block colour for your sponge, if you are colouring it, then it is just a case of adding the colour and mixing it in until it's fully combined. So once all of the sponge is in the muffin cases, we are putting this in our preheated oven. You want to put these on for around 20 minutes. Again, this is going to be dependent on how your oven bakes. So once that 20 minutes is up, then insert a skewer, a toothpick, I have a designated cake tester because of course I do, into your sponge. If that comes out spotlessly clean, your cakes are done. If there is still a little bit of wet mix on the skewer, then you will need to put that back in the oven for another 5 minutes and do the test again until they are cooked. And now that your cakes are done, you want to wait for them to cool before removing them from the muffin tin and putting them on a wire rack to cool completely before decorating them. So you can now see a little spoiler as to the next video that's coming and how I decorate these. And there are a couple of perhaps a bit more advanced techniques in here, but there's also a couple that just about anybody can do. Do go ahead and watch that video where I fail to look like I've ever decorated a cake before, and thank you for joining me on this one. I hope you have a wonderful day. Whatever you're doing today, remember that you are awesome. Thank you.